are you a good person? That's quite a question, isn't it?
Mhm.
And it really depends on who's asking. If it's other people, who cares what they think? Are you asking that? Are you asking whether or not you're a good person? Do you doubt that? That's what I wanted to talk about tonight, how this relates to humility, what humility actually is, and also the opportunity to take a close look within ourselves and see what, if anything, makes us feel ashamed or like we're a bad person. And normally that only happens like in therapy or conversations with close friends, but it's something that we really have to take notice of ourselves and do the deep dive and find out whenever we experience a twinge of conscience or when somebody says something that triggers shame in us, then we have to take a look at that and see why. What's going on in there? And at that point, we have to do shadow work and get to the bottom of why these negative, shameful moments come up in our memory. And of course, some of those, we can take care of simply by reviewing the situation, what happened, figuring out what you didn't know back then and what you may not know now, whether or not that situation has improved or it's the same. Just recognizing that has a lot of power in it. And then the third thing is to make a plan for what to do about it, so that if that kind of situation comes up again, you have a plan. And just the process of thinking those things through will lower your internal shame quotient by a large margin. And it'll also reduce your anxiety, because even when we're not conscious of those things, they're operating in the background. Kind of always a low grade anxiety we're so used to that we don't even notice. So let's look at that second perspective, what we think about ourselves. Now, it's well known that the prophets of the Old Testament didn't live very long because they made a lot of people angry. Because why? Because they told the truth. They were like the reformers of their day. And back then, politics and religion were one and the same. When the prophets criticized those in power, they just, the ones in power just after a while got tired of it and had them taken out. But why would someone who is regarded as a prophet or a holy man, a seer, a sage, guru, whatever you want to call them, why would such a person be so contrary? Why would they be such a pain in anybody's ass, right? Because that's not what we expect of spiritual people. So it's a good question. And the only answer that I've come up with is that these people, powerful people, they regarded nothing good but God. There was nothing between them and God. Their relationship was so solid that nobody else's opinion mattered. And how does this look in real life? It's like a person like that would be a person who would never ignore their intuition. If they knew they should do something, they do it because they are inner reliant. They have found that place within them that is never wrong, and they've followed it so often that they're able to identify it and really move with it when it happens. They are also people who, when something's not right, they absolutely will not do it. And that can get pretty nuanced, because when you're living in a society and that society is going in a bad direction, it's only natural that everybody would think the same, even if what they're thinking is wrong. So a prophet shows up in a situation like that and says, you guys are all lying to yourselves. And it doesn't take much of an imagination to, figure out what would happen to a person like that who's condemning everybody. And it literally is condemning them. But it's not out of arrogance. It's not out of pride. It's about a fierce devotion to God and God alone. And this kind of explains why the Middle Easterners, not just the Middle Easterners, but like your fundamentalist Muslims, they are fierce. And it's because of that. They put nothing between them and God, roughly speaking. So what we can do, it's not that everyone wants to do this, but what's possible, what's within our grasp, is that we can, number one, start to treat everybody the same, like they are no better than you are and you are no better than they are, no matter what their station, no matter what their status. And that includes spiritual status, right? It's like when you have a bunch of disciples around their guru, the guru is God, you see. And of course, everybody is God in that sense, but they don't, they see the guru as like an avatar, a stand-in, an actual living manifestation of God. So, and that's a mistake. It's a matter of leveling the playing field where nobody, regardless who it is, what their material status is, how rich, how poor, how powerful, how dispossessed, doesn't matter. Everybody's the same. And then the other is to be so attentive to God, which is within you, right? You are the mechanism by which you pick up God's intent, God's will, God's order, God's love. All of these things are registered within the human body. That's what the human body does. And the mixture of mind, body, and spirit working together makes a marvelous antenna. So if your receptivity, if the thing you place yourself beneath is that, then that's humility, because there's nothing more important, not your ego, not other people's egos, not laws, not customs, not dogma, nothing, none of that matters. It's all the same. But what does matter is your direct connection with God and how true you are to that. But look out, because the more you go down that path, the more annoying people get. And but it's not a matter of arrogance or egotism. It's a matter of, what the hell are you people doing? This is not right, and you're so far off the path. You see, that kind of attitude won't get you far in life. So that's what we're looking at when we ask, are we a good person? Because the idea, the concept of good and evil is really man-made, because things either are or they're not. Things either possess harmony among themselves or they don't. So you have harmony and disharmony. You have resonance and you have dissonance. If we learn how to think in terms of that kind of assessment, which is scientific actually, then we get a better handle on this idea of what's good and evil, because good and evil as concepts have been so distorted, for so long now. There's not much there in the way of a clue as to what those things might be, because some things we think are good are not good. Some things we think are bad. They're not bad at all. In fact, they're good. So who are we to judge, right? That's not to throw us off the end of the pier so that we're swimming in uncharted waters, like we're unmoored from reality or any common sense appraisal of what good and evil is. That's not what I'm saying. But we have to also recognize that the relative nature of vibration and how a particular state of mind has its vibration and another state of mind has its vibration. And those two minds may or may not find harmony. There may be resonance or not. So this helps us not to judge the other person, but just to recognize that there's an incompatibility. And then from there, we can work it out as to how to live with each other if we have to, or when to cut bait and run. So these are just a few of the things that came up for me in terms of the Bible quote where the rich young man says to Jesus, "Good master," and Jesus turns around and says, "Why are you calling me good?" You see, so he's got several things going on there that he's conveying to this guy. He's saying that what I just said to you, your ideas of good are based in the world, and they're not necessarily spiritually good. They may work for you to make money, but they're not doing anything for your soul. So that's one perspective he's giving. And then the other perspective is that he's saying, you're looking to me You're putting me between you and God. Why are you doing that? You see, it's very, very pointed. He said, you know, in between the lines, he's saying that there's no one, absolutely no one between you and God if you avail yourself to that connection. If you don't, then there are a lot of things, a lot of people can come between you and God. And those things and people then, by definition, will become God for you, because that's just how it works. Whatever you place above yourself, that is God. That is your God. And that you might see the real God, you know, through it, or you might not. It might be opaque. It might be an opaque idol. So this is a major transformation. This is a major spiritual transformation to move beyond the consensus of the world and actually start thinking in terms of soul, your soul. What's going on with you and your relationship with God? And that's where things really get real, because you find yourself, you have to live outside the boundaries of what's known as common sense, and what's appropriate or inappropriate, what's expected of you in any dimension whatsoever. All of these things take on a level of unimportance that can be surprising and disorienting to people when they approach this level of their spiritual development. And not many people are willing to do it, right? You know, and Jesus touched on this too when he said, unless you hate your father, your mother, your brother, your sister, your wife, your children, everybody, right? He was saying essentially the same thing. He's saying, whatever you put between you and God, that's an idol. That's blocking your direct connection with God, and that's costing you power, vitality, intelligence, compassion, soulfulness. Every part of you suffers whenever we put anything between us and God. So that's quite a tall order, because essentially you have to renounce the world. This doesn't mean that we have to become ascetics. We don't have to just get rid of everything, go out and live in the desert. It means that we have to discover and develop the skill of detachment. So, you know how they say, if you want to quit smoking, you have to do something else at the same time, or you won't be successful. In order to change a habit, you should change two. And they somehow reinforce the change when you do two instead of one. So when you renounce the world, that by itself would make you an ascetic. It would make you a miserable old coot living out in the desert with a bunch of other miserable old coots thinking up stuff to write about. Forgive me. So we have to balance that out with something realistic and something constructive. And so what we do is we replace the bad habit, which is thinking in materialistic ways, and not just thinking that way, but valuing things that way. You know, in other words, valuing material possessions over spiritual attainment. We have to put that first. You see, we have to, and it's not even have to, it's like we get to create a tighter, more intimate, closer relationship with God, because our attention is no longer primarily on the world. It's like 1/3 on the world, and then 2/3 we're always looking up, metaphorically speaking, to that dimension where we can't really see, we can't really know God completely, you know, at all. But we know he's there. The Father, Mother, God is always there, and it's here. It permeates everything. So by that's how we balance this out and not make it such a drudgery and an impossible task to renounce the world. While we renounce one, we affirm the other. So we begin to pay attention to our intuition. We begin to pay attention to the thoughts that go through our minds. We begin to pay attention to things that cause us to react. We pay attention to why we find some people more, I don't want to say important, because some people are more important. Your family is more important. But if your love for your family and the esteem that you hold your family in prevents you or dissuades you from seeing that everyone is part of your family, then you haven't gotten it. So it's a paradox. It's like, yes, you can care for your own family and your own spouse and people close to you. Yeah, they are part of you. You know, you own them in that sense. It's like you're one of ours, right? That's what each of your family members says to each other. You're one of ours. So that's okay, but you have to put God above that. It's just simply how it has to be. And even with your spouse, to the point where your relationship with God is so totally private that you don't let anybody in there, not anybody. And even Jesus Christ will support you in forming that connection directly with God, because that's why he came, was so that we can do that. He didn't come to be God for us. He came here to show us the way to God. And so he will support us in forming that direct connection. It's like the Buddhists say, you know, if you see the Buddha on the road, kill him. It's shocking to the Western mind, you know, especially if you substitute Jesus for the Buddha, right? That's almost impossible to think. But that's what Jesus is telling the rich young man. He's saying, look, you're looking at me inappropriately when you should be looking within. You should be looking at the God within you, not at me. So this too is a bit paradoxical, because young people, especially young men, need leadership, and they need somebody to be a surrogate God, you might say. But every skilled and knowledgeable and experienced teacher or guru knows that you undermine that. You plant seeds of destruction to their way of looking at you. So that's the protocol. You know, of course, not all teachers do that, and their students suffer as a result. So we can respect each other, but we do not place anybody between us and God. And the more we do that, then the freer we become, because we're no longer constrained either by our own judgments of ourselves or other people's judgment of us. We no longer have that constraint, because we've dealt with those things. And if we haven't dealt with them, we're in the process of dealing with them. So that's what sets us apart as people on the spiritual path, because we shed the worldly concerns in favor of the inner world, our own inner consciousness, what's within us. We go within. There's nothing out here. We go within. And so I could go on and on about that, but why don't I open it up? And you guys have any questions about that? Any complaints? This kind of goes against most religious dogma, right? Or most, not dogma, that's the wrong word. It goes against most religious culture.
Well, it's the first commandment in Christianity, right?
Yeah, Judaism too.
Yeah. And so as you were reading this, synchronicity just opened my Bible, Matthew 11 or 10. Anyway, he says, he who loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. He who loves his son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. It's what you're saying. It's prioritizing. It makes sense if there's a hierarchy, right, of being.
Yep.
For us to be authentic, then we must be as close to our origin or source as we can if we hope to be real or authentic, right? or
Yeah,
to be,
that's the word. That's the word, is authenticity.
yeah, yeah.
Because nothing
And
kills authenticity by putting something between you and God.
right, right,
Because that's your true self, right?
right,
That's who you actually are. That's the higher self.
right. As you said at the
Yeah.
beginning, though, it doesn't always go over so well.
No, rarely, if ever.
Right, right. They're like,
Although, if you look at the film industry, who do we love the most in those actors? It's the ones who can demonstrate the greatest authenticity.
yeah,
We love authenticity. We
that's true.
crave it.
Right, because it's real. It's
Yeah.
because it's the real. It's yeah.
Yep.
Instead of the mask, right? Instead of the mask, it's the yeah.
Yeah. We crave to see and to be seen. Those are two very important things to us. And we can't see each other if we're all wearing masks. Now, this is not to say that if you do this, then voila, you are now enlightened and you're, like this with God. That's not what this is about at all. It's a gradual transformation. It can go fast or go slow depending on how much effort you put into forming that connection. But it is a process. So as long as we're here in a physical body, it will be a work in progress. And then if we ever get to that point, as the sacred scriptures all around the world say, if you reach the point where you are completely free of the wheel of karma, let's say, then you have a choice. You can either leave or you can stay and help. So, and that's what Buddha was. He was a bodhisattva, and Jesus is a bodhisattva. Anybody who has the capability of no longer being here but stays for service, that's a bodhisattva.
You know, what comes to me is that this is always different for every person for where they are in their spiritual development or relationship with source, right? Like
Yes.
it reminds me of the disciples when they asked the master about, I think it was John, maybe. Like, well, what about him? And then he looked at him, he's like, what business is that of yours?
Oh
If
yeah.
I want
Yeah.
him to walk the earth for till the end of time, it's none of your business. You know, that's
Yeah.
saying that
Yeah.
each of us have to be true to our calling, to ourself, right?
Yeah. Yeah. That's the sacred duty. But this approach is not without danger, because humans, meaning you and me and all of us, are
Yeah.
prone to self-delusion.
Oh,
So we can think that we're, putting God ahead of all else when we can actually just be putting our ego ahead of all else.
oh yeah.
So and we all, we've seen that happen so many times, and we have to, humility dictates that we keep our eye on ourselves all the time in this regard. What am I in it for? You see, in it is any interaction we have with each other. It's like, what's my purpose here, or what's my intention? Do I have an agenda? Is it serving me? Is it serving them? Or is it serving everyone? It's that kind of self-inquiry that becomes very important. Otherwise, you can just become a raging egomaniac, narcissistic, and abuse everybody who comes within a 3-foot radius of you. So this is not for immature seekers, shall we say. It's for people who have had enough, it's for people who have hit the guardrail in their life enough times to where they've learned not to do that, right? They've learned from their own mistakes, they've learned from the mistakes of others, and they learn how to stay on the road. And so for that kind of person, then this starts to make a lot of sense, because they've already felt what it's like to hit a brick wall. They know what pain is, and they know what scandal is. They know how devastating mistakes can be. So they're real attentive and real, they have their antenna up for that. So that's a good candidate for a person on the spiritual path, because they've got some common sense, right? They've got some maturity. They're not going to do anything stupid, or at least not knowingly. So that's what the teacher is for, is to help the student not unknowingly make mistakes, especially big ones. So it's kind of a different agenda, isn't it? It's a different moral landscape in terms of religious training or spiritual training, spiritual discipline. It kind of separates the wheat from the chaff, or the men from the boys and the women from the girls. It's like, this is for mature people. This is for those who are serious about it, and who are willing to give all for it. And there are lots of people like this, and you don't see them. They're just quietly going about their lives doing this and not making waves. They're not the fire-breathing prophet who's going to get his head cut off, but they're just within themselves. They're working this out, and they're finding that direct path to God, and slowly but surely shifting their attention away from the things of the earth and material life to spiritual things. And you'd never know it. So that's really a testament to their humility. They're not bragging about it. They're not making a show of it. They're just quietly going about their own inner work, and it's working. It's changing them. It's transforming them. So you can't always tell. So, and that's another good reason to watch yourself and not let yourself get delusional, thinking that you're more than you actually are, you see. And no matter what you are, what you become, or how, many insights you have, or how many spiritual skills you develop, you will always be under God, right? God will always be greater than you. Knowing that intellectually and knowing it in your bones, two different things. So the whole idea is to get to know it in your bones, so that you never have a question about, well, is this me or is this God, right? It doesn't matter, as long as it's not you and you're looking in the right direction. I look up because that's where we normally look when we think of God or anything greater than us, right? I think it probably, well, there are real reasons why, we have this vertical dimension of up and down, and up is associated with good, reasons that can be found in sacred geometry. But really, it's like when we were little kids, little toddlers, all the action is going on up in the world of the adults, and we were always reaching up, pick me up, pick me up. So that's like a perfect metaphor for our relationship to God, because God is so much bigger, and God has everything we need. God takes care of us and all of that. So we look up, and it's like, how they say, if you smile, if you're feeling really down, if you just smile, you'll automatically feel better. Well, this is kind of the same way. When you reach up, either literally like this in prayer, or you look up like that in your heart and in your spirit, you reach up, you reach up for that elevated consciousness. That's why we do it, because it's associated with good. And as we do it with our body, that activates our emotions, our spirit, our heart, our thinking. Everything comes into alignment because we're enacting this vertical dimension of our being. I know it's a lot, and some of these perspectives can be, really different from mainstream religion and even mainstream spirituality, because there's a lot of confusion in both of those camps, I think, because it's so easy for people to put something between them and God. So easy. The ego so loves to be important and to be seen as important and to be right, to be right. Sometimes it's good to just intentionally be wrong. you know, so that you kind of, I mean, it's a lot better if you're the one who knocks yourself off your high horse rather than have somebody else do it. Sometimes it's just works so much better if you just voluntarily get off the damn thing and walk with the rest of everyone else. So, and two, you know, you can, you have to wonder, I was thinking about this today. You have to wonder why the Pharisees wanted so badly to kill Jesus. I mean, he must have been really getting under their skin, right? I mean, seriously, he represented some kind of existential threat to them. So every time he did something that didn't fit their idea of holiness, they would call him out on it. You know, hey, you're hanging out with the prostitutes, you're hanging out with the tax collectors, with you know, you're going to these parties, everyone's getting drunk, and all of these accusations they would level at him, because that's all they, you know, they were grasping at straws, because he was showing them up so badly. You know, not only was could he connect, obviously connect with God so thoroughly, completely, but he could do the things that he did. You know, he could heal people, he had control over the elements, he had abilities that they had only heard of and they had forgotten and had neglected and therefore lost. So he was bringing all of that knowledge back to them, to the people. Well, I've been doing all the talking mostly. So how does this strike you? What comes to mind? What does it bring up?
Well, looking at my childhood, I can remember going to church and being first exposed to the whole good and evil paradigm, or if you want to call it that. And as I can remember very distinctly my childlike mind, and we're talking very young, but trying to grasp or to grasp this whole concept of good and evil and salvation and all of these things. And I can remember really clearly coming to this conclusion on my own that at the end of my life, if I were 51% good, I was going to make it. Like if all of my actions, right, whatever they
Yeah.
were,
Yeah,
if
just under the wire.
if they tally up at the end, all I got to do is eke in at over 50%, then I'm gonna go to heaven, right? And it's really funny, but that's kind of the only logical, even now as an adult, if you look at good and evil in that black and white, this and that,
Yeah,
rather than, I guess, perhaps a more mature understanding of it would be how true one is to God or to self, and how authentic, how in alignment we are in our thoughts, words, and deeds, etc. Without
right.
without making it about us being more important than God or everyone else, which is all God. I mean, that's all that is, right? That's all we really ever see
Right.
or experience. And it's a real shift how to stay in a state of unity consciousness and still maintain and function in the world. I guess, that's the art or an art, and seems to be the path, like how we grow into maybe fulfilling that role or living that in the world
Yeah. Yeah.
with humility, right? Real humility.
The proof of humility is whether you can live in the world and not put anything between you and God, and yet not leave the world. And what I mean by that is that you can be a member of a group, you can be a member of a family, you can be a member of a church, member of anything where your presence and your abilities are needed by the group and you belong there. The real proof of humility is whether you can not put those things between you and God and yet still do your duty or fulfill your obligations. and not complain about it. This is a real test of humility. So you can be in a job that you hate, but it doesn't really matter because you don't live for your job. You live for God. And so everything, regardless of how fast or slow it comes by you, is an opportunity to see God and to serve God, is to learn how energy works and how the lifeblood of God moves through us and manifests in the world, and how we have, if we're in connection with God, we then see how the world actually functions. So it doesn't really matter whether we've got a great job or a crappy job. What matters is how we approach the job and whether we're embedded in it and subject to it, or if we quietly and humbly just do the job, but keep our connection with God. That's humility. And then somebody gets in your face, makes your life difficult for any reason whatsoever, it doesn't really stick because you're not there. You see, you're not in the same world that they are in. You're fully in it. You know, you're doing your job. You're able to act and interact with people, but your real connection is with God. That's where you're coming from, and that gives you a marvelous detachment. It's what Jesus meant by blessed are the poor in spirit, because you don't have a lot of invested in the spirit of this world. You're not interested in status, material status. You're interested in your own, the health of your soul and the ability you have to function spiritually in the world. Remember, Jesus said when he was praying in the Garden of Gethsemane, he was going to die soon, and he said, I pray, Father, that not to take my disciples out of the world, but to keep them from the evil. And that's what he meant. He meant, don't let them put anything between them and God. Don't let them, because of their fear, put their own personal safety between them and God. Don't let them, because of their attachments to their families, put their families between them and God. You see, because he knew that if they keep God first, all of those other things are going to work perfectly. You see, and everything that needs to be done will be done. But the minute you interrupt that connection with God, that's when error or sin or missing the mark comes in. So it all begins with keeping God first, and then everything else will be taken care of. Well, that's all I've got tonight, guys.
That's all.
Unless, yeah, I'm out. So it's great. When just a few of us are here, it really, I like it. You know, I like the big turnouts too, but these small gatherings are kind of cool. I'm so glad both of you showed up.
You know, you're able to articulate spiritual growth, you know, what I'm working towards in a way that I'm able to get and understand, you know, exactly what I'm trying to do and why. And so
Oh, thank you so much. That means a lot to me.
Do you know about this book?
The Five Vows?
Mm-hmm.
No, I do not. Who's it by?
Michael wrote it.
Oh, I didn't know that.
You can get it on Amazon. You might like it. It's really not trying to sell you something. I'm just saying, you might be interested in it. I find the more I read it and then I read it again, and it's like, oh, it's really well written.
Thanks.
Recommended,
Thanks, Eli.
recommended read.
Well, you know, it's almost fall and I can sink into a good book. You know, that's when I really am able to just tune the world out. And so I will check
Well,
that out.
okay,
Great.
cool.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Eli.
Yeah, no, thank you. It's really well done. I mean,
I want that in
this
writing.
this right here, and I'm really working on it, is it helps. I think Michael said something earlier in the class about our views and beliefs and whatever, whether they allow us to even see a clear picture of the divine or God, and just contemplating this and is integrating it, between oneself and God and no one else. It seems to really be helpful, like super, super helpful to make that connection for me. It's a work in progress. Don't get me wrong. but but it's it's really beautifully done, and I think it's incredibly the simplicity is deceptive in how much power there is in the five vows. He does a good job of explaining like why people take vows, and that I think we kind of lost that in our culture, you know, the value of it. Like we look at it like a burden, right? That only people did back in monasteries and whatnot. And really they're like just blessings to help us, like give us the strength to stay in alignment with the one, with God. Anyway, that's yeah. Let me know if you at a later date if you do read it. I'd be curious
Okay.
to hear what you
Okay.
think. And
And
you can do it when
check
Michael's
out
not around.
yeah, check out the comment, or not the comments, the reviews on Amazon.
I
Yeah,
will.
they're I was really blown away by the reviews.
When did you write the book?
Oh, I think it was in 2015, maybe. Right around then. Then I wrote a second one also the after that. So
Yeah, this is
but you'll
copyrighted in 2014.
oh, okay. Yeah,
Just so you know.
2014.
Just read it.
Great. Yeah. I don't even have a copy of that. I need to get one. I have it
Okay.
on my computer. I just don't have a physical copy. All right, guys. Thanks, Eli. Thanks for bringing that up. I really appreciate that.
Oh, thank you. I've been looking for it today, and I was like, anyway, this is my current read again. So
Oh,
thank you,
good.
Michael. Thank you for the class.
All right, guys. Have a good night.
You too. Bye bye.